Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I am your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, creator and founder of Feel Younger and Genetic Insights, Owen Robinson. And today we are discussing building blocks and why they are so vital and important to your health and well-being. So tell me, Owen, what are these beautiful things called building blocks and why are they? What are they and why are they important?
So building blocks is what I refer to as the thing that your body and therefore brain and everything you consider you is actually made out of. And that's from a chemistry point of view. You could talk about it from a physics point of view, which I won't, So physics is our body made out of particles, like Newton thought? Like little things? Is it made out of energy, like Einstein discovered? Or is it even made out of maybe information or consciousness or something else, like the quantum scientists are speculating about? I've done a big presentation on that before. I'm not going to do that today. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about chemistry. We're talking about the elemental table. We're talking about what is the actual stuff, the chemicals that your body is built out of. Because if you do not have enough of those essential building blocks, those elements, then you would die instantly. And also, if you have too much, you would also die. So these are super, super important. Now, not having enough or too much is not commonly a direct cause of death, except for maybe in the cases for things like asphyxiation. But having not enough or too much can often cause a chain reaction that ultimately ends in serious diseases. And I'll give, a few examples as we go through the episodes on why these are so important. So let's go through the building blocks. So most of your body is made out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So carbon you get from carbohydrates. That's why they both start with carb. That's one of the main sources. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as well. We've talked about that before in a previous episode, how I consider it as one of the most important nutrients. Then there is also, so hydrogen you would get from hydration, right? So H2O, water. Also to some degree, fats and proteins and carbohydrates, all the rest of it often contain hydrogen. Nitrogen comes especially from proteins and the amino acids that make up proteins. So those are the basic places, where we get most of our fuel from, right? Most of our fuel is carbs, fats, and proteins. And then from the air we breathe. So we won't really focus on that today. We focused on that before. So what we're going to focus on, that's not all you're made out of. That's the other thing. So even though that's the majority of what you're made out of, you're also made out of a bunch of other stuff. So there's a bunch of other minerals, often they're referred to as, and other elements that compose you, whether it's things you've heard of, like calcium and magnesium and iron, and then things you might be less familiar with, like manganese and molybdenum and cobalt. But all of these things make up you. And then sometimes there are also elements that make up you that you maybe wish you had less of, like lead or mercury or aluminium, as we call it over here, those kind of things. So these are all the building blocks that make up you. And then, so that's at the most basic intrinsic level. And then, of course, elements aren't, usually singular. So then there's combinations of elements. So there's, different fats, different amino acids, different vitamins as well. And so the combination of all those things are what make up a person. Often when I'm working with people and helping them, building blocks is one of the first things I like to focus on. Not because it's necessarily the most important, although sometimes it is, but because it's one of the easiest things to resolve and deal with. So for instance, like in functional medicine, I know one of the first things that I like to focus on is the gut health and restoring gut health. But that's quite a tricky thing to do often. There's a lot involved in that. It takes a long time. Often it can make the person feel worse before they feel better. There's all kinds of issues with that. What I like about starting with nutrients or building blocks in many cases is it's actually quite easy. Sometimes you can tell what someone needs just through observation. Sometimes I can tell based on seeing what their genetic reports say. Like for instance, if their genetic reports say that they have an increased need for a nutrient, and then I question them and it's obvious that their diet is very low in that nutrient, it's not that much of a leap to say they're probably deficient in that, or at least they have a suboptimal amount of that. And then I can guess that just increasing that would be a good idea, especially if that nutrient happens to be a nutrient that is quite hard to have too much of, which is not true for all of them, So for some things like iron, I really don't want to guess if a person needs it. I do want the person to test. Same with, say, vitamin D3. But for other things like, most like vitamin B12 or magnesium, something like that, usually I would just recommend that the person goes for that because it's kind of hard to get too much of those things. So it kind of varies. So that's why I like to focus on it. That's why it's super important. And that's why before people take, hormonal treatments, which I'm a big fan of, peptides, which I'm a big fan of, do often, difficult and sometimes unpleasant detoxification regimes or, strategies to deal with toxins, strategies to deal with pathogenic organisms of all kinds. All of those things can be, super helpful and important, but they're all quite difficult, time-consuming, costly, can make you feel worse before they make you feel better. In many cases, some cases I like to work with hormones, especially to start a person with hormones if they just feel terrible, to help them feel better straight away. But another thing that is a really great starting point is just these building blocks, these nutrients. Because so many things often go wrong are downstream of nutrients. Like when there is a nutrient missing, magnesium is a famous example. Magnesium is involved in over 500 different chemical processes in the body. Some say over 1,000, kind of depends who you listen to. Some say over 800. And so if you don't have enough magnesium, then so many different processes can go wrong. It can create problems pretty much everywhere. And this is one of the reasons why the mainstream medical establishment often doesn't like to look at nutrients, because they're not very easy. It's not very easy to isolate. What they like is like a drug that has a very specific effect, that's very noticeable and very measurable. And they don't like this thing that a nutrient which could make you feel better in like 1,000 different ways, and it's very hard to predict how it will or won't make you feel better. So they don't like its lack of predictability. They don't like that it has such a widespread effect. But I would personally prefer to start with nutrients for that very reason, because they are more natural, because they do have more of a widespread effect, and because of that, their side effect profile is generally a lot less, a lot safer than the vast majority of drugs, even including things like bioidentical hormones.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that these building blocks are the essential recipe to our body and what we're made of. So it's kind of like if you're baking a cake and let's say we're leaving out the sugar and then you go to taste it and it's like, I don't know. And then somebody's like, well, maybe add this in or do that or, something else to fix it. But it's like if you go right back to the beginning and say, we're missing the sugar. Easy fix. Quick, put that in and it's going to taste great.
Yeah, or use salt instead of sugar, right? Which does occasionally happen, and you're this cake is disgusting. And that, the analogy for that, I guess, is too much of some of the building blocks, right? That can also be just as much of a problem and is fairly common, certainly more common than most people realize.
Absolutely. And, so what I'm understanding is that from especially what you're saying here is that, because I was going to ask, well, really, why do these matter? But I think you pretty much summed it up. That if we don't have these things, and, please elaborate here, there's so many different processes, like you explained with the magnesium, that aren't able to be completed, correct?
Yeah. Let me give you a specific example that relates to me. So one of the things that's probably, I would say, most criminally unfocused on when it comes to building blocks is actually the individual amino acids. So these days, there's more awareness of vitamins, especially like D3 has become very popular recently.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, would you mind giving the definition of those amino acids as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so vitamins like D3 have become very popular. Vitamin C used to be very popular. I think minerals like zinc and magnesium are very popular these days, as they should be. They're both very important. But the kind of amino acid world is usually regulated more to like bodybuilders and sports people, and I think that's a huge mistake. I think that anyone who's looking to optimize their health or even resolve some kind of health challenge should learn more about amino acids. So what amino acids are the what protein is composed of. So They are individual, as I say, nitrogen-containing elements. They are also what most of our body is actually made of, depending on how you view it. If you look at it from the amount of molecules, then most of our body is made out of water. But if you look at it through sheer volume, then we could say most of our body is made out of these amino acids. A lot of people argue that amino acids are actually the main thing that we crave and need when we eat, and that is why when you eat protein, it's so satiating. If you eat a low protein diet or just meal with lots of fat and sugar, you can eat loads. It's very easy to overeat when there's not a lot of protein. And conversely, when there is a large amount of protein in a meal, it's very difficult to overeat because it feels so satiating. And it's true that most of our body is composed of those proteins. The obvious example of that, of course, is, if you eat other mammals, then most of their body is composed of, protein and fat. So I guess it does depend how much fat you hold in your body. If you are very overweight, then the ratio shifts maybe, and not as much of your body is made out of protein. But yeah, certainly a healthy body is composed primarily of protein by volume. And so what's that protein made out of? These different amino acids. So these are different amino acids have different functions, all the way down to the level of the DNA and the RNA. But they also have different functions on a little bit more of a macro level. So let me give an example of one that I found out through genetic insights reports, that I have a genetic tendency to need more of than the average person, and that's called L-tyrosine. And we talked about tyrosine before. I keep talking about it because I feel it's criminally under-focused on, but we'll talk about more amino acids throughout the episodes as they come up. So I especially needed tyrosine. The other one was lysine that I tend to need more of. And sure enough, when I did a test for my amino acids, I didn't show up as being generally low in amino acids. So if someone is generally low of a lot of amino acids, that probably shows that they're not eating enough protein, or they're not managing to digest and assimilate enough protein, absorb enough protein, which often relates to issues maybe over lack of stomach acids. But for me, it was not so much that, and more these specific amino acids were low, which was indicated by my genetics. So I started to have more of these amino acids, supplementing them in addition to plenty of protein, and I did start to feel better, especially the tyrosine. It's very noticeable. And so what does tyrosine do? I mean, tyrosine does a lot. We've talked about peptides, and so peptides are simply short chains of those amino acids tied together. Proteins are very long chains of those amino acids tied together. So many essential peptides feature tyrosine. But the thing that, to me, that's noteworthy about tyrosine is that it is the building block, to use that word again, of three very important compounds. First of all, it's the building block for thyroxine, T4 and T3, which is thyroid hormone. In fact, when we talk about T4, T3, T4 just means 1 tyrosine plus 4 iodine, and iodine being a mineral, which is also a building block. And T3 is 1 tyrosine and 3 iodine. So that's really all it is. That's what we're talking about. And yet, that is hugely important. That can massively impact your health. We talked about that before in several different episodes. The episode on thyroid, the episode on metabolism, the episode where we talk about Ray Peat's theories. That if you don't have enough of that, your metabolism is not going fast enough, and this can lead to endless other problems. I won't go over all those again because we've covered it in detail in those episodes. Another thing that tyrosine is the essential building block for is dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline. And we've done whole episodes on those as well. They're super, super important.
Yeah, so really check those out.
That was under feel-good chemicals, I think that was called. And it really is impossible to feel good, and especially the type of feeling good which means you feel motivated to achieve stuff, without dopamine. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are also, very important. In their own ways. They're stress chemicals, but they serve a very valuable function, and it's good to have them be high for short bursts of time, not chronically high. For instance, noradrenaline is a powerful anti-inflammatory, and it's one of the reasons why doing intense exercise or intense breathing practices or intense cold exposure is so beneficial, is because it temporarily spikes that noradrenaline. But anyway, these are all extremely valuable compounds without, or let's say not without, but with a low level of dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, you will absolutely have low energy and motivation. There is no question about that. There is nothing you can do instead. Like you might say, oh, you can take caffeine, you can take amphetamine. Yeah, but those will raise those chemicals. That's how they work. There is nothing about any stimulant that works other than by raising those chemicals.
And you still need the building blocks to make those chemicals, correct?
And you still need the building blocks to make them. Absolutely. So it goes back to that again. And then tyrosine is also the building block for melanin. Now, melanin is something that I've become very interested in recently. We'll probably do a full episode on this at some point, Chrissy, once I've learned more. But it turns out, so melanin is the skin pigment. It's the pigment that makes your hair darker, that makes your skin darker, that makes your eyes darker. I say darker because depending on the concentration of melanin will be how dark those things will be. So someone who's from sub-Saharan Africa will have very high levels of melanin pigmentation. Someone who's an albino will have very low level of, or in fact none of the melanin pigmentation. So we think of melanin as something that protects us from the sun, and also that more is stimulated by the sun. So that's the idea of getting a tan when you go into the sun. But in fact, there's a lot more to it than that. And it turns out that melanin may actually be another energy generating system in the body, completely separate from ATP. That melanin is a alternative form of energy. I won't say more than that because, as I say, I'd like to do a whole episode on it once I have understood it more. But it may well be that tyrosine is the essential building block for a completely separate and super important energy system, and it explains why people need less food in the summertime, maybe why the more sun exposure people have, the more energy they often feel, stuff like that.
Interesting theory.
So
yeah.
And I believe it's not just a theory. There's a lot of science behind it, a lot of studies behind it. I think it's just not fully understood yet, certainly by me, but possibly in general as well. So more work needs to be done. But it's definitely beyond the hypothesis. There definitely is an energy conducting element to melanin. It's the degree of it that they're still clarifying and investigating. So anyway, just as an example, one amino acid out of the commonly 20 considered amino acids, 20-ish. It's not even considered to be one of the 8 essential amino acids because your body can make tyrosine out of another amino acid, which I always mispronounce, called phenylalanine. And so that's just an example of where if you're lacking one building block, or even not just lacking, but not enough for to be optimal, your body's going to decide. Do we make less melanin? Do we make less thyroxine? Do we make less dopamine? Do we make less adrenaline? We don't have enough for everyone. So we got to decide how to prioritize. And
Absolutely.
in fact,
yeah. So it's kind of, go ahead. I was going to say, it's like, okay, do we pay the rent or do we feed ourselves? What are we going to do this month?
Yeah. And how it decides to prioritize often is to prioritize adrenaline and noradrenaline because those are survival chemicals. And so a person ends up high in stress because that's a survival priority, but low metabolism, low thyroxine, low joy in life, low dopamine, and maybe even with some kind of pigmentation issues, which show up eventually over time as well.
Interesting.
Like, for instance, going grey. And there is that association between people having extreme stress experiences and going grey. This is a bit of a minefield. Like, there are some people who actually want to limit that tyrosine expression. For instance, people who are trying to make their eyes more blue, because it reduces the pigmentation in there, and people trying to reduce the pigment in their skin. So it's not always, a completely black and white thing, but basically bottom line is just one example of a building block that I happen to, be a particular fan of. But in fact, all of them have that kind of importance, even though they're not always as easily understood. And some still are being investigated. There's new research on an ongoing basis. Oh, this does this. Oh, this does this, So these building blocks are super important. And when you have a suboptimal amount of any of them, it can be a really big deal, and it can lead to you feeling bad, having issues, and yeah, eventually even life-threatening problems potentially.
So how would somebody know if they are lacking these building blocks or if they have an optimal amount? Like how would there be signs, symptoms? Is it a state of feeling? How would they know?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, if we use the example I just said, if someone is generally low in energy, low in motivation, feels cold a lot, all of that kind of stuff, they could just try adding tyrosine. Tyrosine is relatively safe. Your body can easily get rid of it if you have, too much of it, as long as you don't go crazy. So you can have like a normal amount that you find in the supplement, which is like 500 milligram, 1,000 milligram, something like that, and just see how you feel, So that is a possibility. And the same is true for a lot of the nutrients as well. If you hit, like, for instance, magnesium, you hear that it's good for sleep, you hear it's good for anxiety, you hear it's, you've got restless leg syndrome, you've got twitches, that kind of stuff. You can just try having some magnesium, see how you feel. You hear it's good for energy, whatever it might be. You can just try it and see how you feel in many cases. Like I said, I wouldn't do that with everything. And we won't be able to cover them all in this episode, but I have covered some of them before in previous episodes where I've gone through my favorite nutrients, and hopefully eventually we'll go through every nutrient.
Well, you bring up a good point. What's the difference between suboptimal and whether a person has a deficiency?
So that is really a question of conforming with a mainstream view. So technically, even though I sometimes use the word incorrectly myself, a deficiency would be such a low level of a nutrient that it creates a disease which mainstream medicine recognizes. So for instance, with vitamin C, the scurvy, right? That's the famous disease. Now, can you have a vitamin C deficiency without having a scurvy? Not by the strictly mainstream definition. And people make this mistake all the time. Even a doctor, an actual medical doctor was interviewing me a week ago, and, we talked about magnesium, and he said, I think a lot of people have magnesium deficiency. And I said, well, technically it's suboptimal, right? Because, and so we all make this mistake. But technically, a deficiency is where there is a disease state that's recognized by the mainstream. So, vitamin B1, it's berry. With vitamin B3, it's pellagra. And this is also where some nutrients, like molybdenum, for instance, which I've talked about before, or lithium, even though I do consider them essential nutrients, they're still kind of borderline. And depending on who you listen to, there's no established daily value that's recommended, because from their perspective, if there's no disease state that they recognize, if you don't have it, then it can't be essential. That's the thing that they're looking for. So that's technically what deficiency is. And so I try not to use that word incorrectly, because I don't want to be making false claims or anything like that. Now, a suboptimal amount means it's not at the level of deficiency where it's a disease bad enough that you can get a medical diagnosis, but it's still not great, the amount that you have, right? And that is way, way, way more common. So one of the big mistakes, I think, of mainstream medicine in the 20th century, and it also is true for, psychiatry, is that there was a very black and white thinking. You've either got it or you haven't. You're either ill or you're great, or you're fine. And one of the things I think, especially psychiatry actually is embraced more, but I do see it more in kind of mainstream body medicine as well, is this idea of a spectrum, right? So it's not black and white. It's not you're either this or you're fine. It's actually there's fine, there's totally ill, and then there's a continuum along which you may be. And so with a lot of these nutrients, including tyrosine, there is a tyrosine deficiency disease. It is extremely rare, and I'm not claiming for a second I had it. But I had a suboptimal amount, as indicated by medical testing and my experience, right? And so this is way, 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 way more common. So I'd encourage people to stop, especially if they're talking to medical professionals, to stop using the word deficiency, because it's only going to make you be dismissed by the doctor. So for instance, if you have anxiety and you say, could it be caused by magnesium deficiency? The doctor is going to say no. And they're technically right? But could it be because I have a suboptimal amount of magnesium?
Then
They may
yes,
still not have a
maybe.
clue,
Yeah. Right.
they may still not have a
Maybe.
clue,
Yeah. Right.
but at least they're not going to like react to it like you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about, because then it's just in the realm of they don't know about that, right? So yeah, I recommend using the terminology suboptimal because it's more accurate. It's much less likely to get a reaction from some kind of mainstream person, and it's also a better way of thinking about it, right? Not a black and white. Oh God, I don't have enough. It's a real problem. It's just that you don't have an optimal amount. That's all.
Yeah, also from an energetic standpoint, using suboptimal versus deficiency, I mean, it's more on the lines of, okay, an easy fix. I can just help bring that up. A deficiency, it just feels heavier. There's a lot more harder work to do that, and maybe you'll never get better from it. So, from
Yeah,
that way, yeah, it definitely reads better, feels better.
I agree. Yeah, emotionally, I 100% agree. Yeah, and that's important.
You mentioned some medical tests to find about whether you had suboptimal levels. So, what would you recommend is the best test for somebody to get to look into this?
That's a good question because there is nothing 100% reliable in many cases out there, which is really, really unfortunate. And I think it's one of the other reasons why doctors are not a huge fan of this kind of stuff, except for in a few cases. So doctors will test a few nutrients. They'll test iron, they'll test B12, they'll test folate. Sometimes they'll also be willing to test like D3, and they will test the electrolytes. But the problem with the way that they test the electrolytes is they're looking at the level in your blood. And again, they're doing it correctly from their point of view because a person has to have a very serious medical issue for the electrolytes, which is the minerals, magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarbonate. A person would have to be, bicarbonate is not technically a mineral, but whatever, it's in that category. A person would have to be very unwell to be outside their reference range for those electrolytes in most cases. And so just because your magnesium could be in the middle of the reference range when they test your blood, and yet you could be very deficient in magnesium from a suboptimal perspective, right? Like it's way lower than you want it to be. It's just not at the actual level of medical deficiency that we just established. So the problem with testing is it's not easy to do. This is a little bit similar to, we did an episode a while ago about like insulin resistance and hypoglycemia and diabetes and stuff like that. And they always test they always test sugar in the blood instead of insulin, even though that's often not the right thing to test. Not necessarily for any nefarious reason, but simply because it is like 100 times easier and cheaper, literally, to test sugar compared to insulin. And so that's what they test. And it's kind of similar-ish for a lot of these vitamins and minerals as well. So what they'll often test at best is what's in the blood. But the problem is, what's in your blood gives you some indication because it tells you at least it's managed to make its way from your mouth to your digestive system, from your digestive system to your liver, and from your liver into your blood. So it's got that far. So it tells you something. It doesn't tell you nothing. But there is fairly often, I would say way more often than the medical establishment are aware of, a possibility of that nutrient to be in the blood but not make it into the cell. Or it's not that your body can't get it into the cell, but it's that your body keeps the level in your blood at a very narrow range, but the cells are actually quite depleted on it, which is frequently the case with things like magnesium and potassium. Your body will keep them in a very narrow range in the blood, but your cells are actually have way less than they'd ideally like of them.
Yeah, because your blood needs to maintain a certain pH level, correct? So that's why the body's very adept at keeping that certain pH, because either way, if it goes too far one way or the other, then that's, we're out of here essentially. So yeah.
Absolutely. And the same thing can go for excess as well. Like you could have an excess of, say sodium, and that's not as common as people think, but it certainly happens. And again, it would not necessarily show up in your blood because your body keeps that within a tight range as well. So it's tricky to test. That's the truth. So there are a few different approaches to this. Number one would be to test the blood and go, it's better than nothing, right? And often, to be honest, for certain things, I'm fine with that. So, but it can be problematic. So I said one of the most common things that's tested is B12, right? Vitamin B12. Well, there can be a situation where the vitamin B12 is actually above the reference range in the blood, but the person still has a lot of symptoms of B12 suboptimal levels. And in fact, when they have even more B12, a lot of those symptoms start to go away. And this is fairly common, which is why I used an example. And so that's, an example of where it's just not getting into the cell for various reasons. And so to carry on with that example, that's why some people recommend for finding out your levels of B12, rather than testing the B12 in the blood, to test something else called methylmalonic acid, I believe it is. But that's actually like a byproduct and an end product that is found in the urine. And so the way that works is if a body doesn't have enough B12, then the level of this methylmalonic acid will increase in the urine because a certain chemical reaction is not happening as it should because there's not enough B12. So this is a different way of measuring things. And there are some companies, like Genova is one that I've recommended before, and there are others that do a lot of this. So this is often called like an organic acids test. And in the case of like a Nutrival test, which Genova does, they'll actually give you a estimation or an evaluation of what nutrients you need more of almost entirely based on these byproducts or end products. So rather than actually looking at the level of nutrient in the blood, they go, okay, we know that if there's not enough of this, then a person tends to have elevated levels of this, or they tend to have depleted levels of this in the urine. And so we can tell, therefore, that the person needs more of this. Now, that is not an exact science either. And that's also disputed. The mainstream medical professions are often not necessarily that they understand it thoroughly and refute it, but more they have no familiarity with it and they assume that it's not real. Although certainly not all of them. Again, I've certainly met open-minded medical doctors who do consider it to be valid. But it's still, it's an estimation. There are always potential reasons why it might not be 100% accurate. But again, I would rather have it than not have it. And I found it to be very accurate. But again, it's just not 100%. A third way that you can assess is by actually measuring the level of the nutrient in the cell. That's a fairly new technology. There are a few companies who claim to do it in the US. Some people are a fan of them, but some people aren't. And that's within my world, of like alternative health people. Some things can actually be measured in within the cell of the red blood cell specifically. And sometimes they measure it in the white blood cell as well. So some nutrients, I've seen that for magnesium, potassium, B1, B2, B3. So there's various nutrients that are measured that way. And that technology seems to have been around a little bit longer and is a little bit different from the other technology, which is measuring from a cell. And so that would be my preferred method to be sure, if it is available. It's not available for every nutrient, but the B vitamins, things like magnesium, potassium, zinc are very important, and often it is possible to get those measured through that red blood cell evaluation.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just need to take a moment to quickly tell you about a way that you can support the podcast by getting high quality, affordable supplements that Elwyn and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is they have great quality products with minimal fillers, but the prices are very affordable. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're really helpful and friendly. And what I love most of all is the amazing descriptions Elwyn's written for each product category about that topic. There's so much information and education on it. I've actually learned more from reading their product descriptions than I have from most articles. So, to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, you can use promo code RejuvenateMe for a 20% discount off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order with promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net. Yeah, so there's a few options here. Maybe not every, they're not necessarily 100%, but at least there's an ability to be able to look, because even though we know how we feel, that's not necessarily a good. We need the gauge. We need to be able to look inside something. At least that's one of the things that you open my eyes up to. And you recommend that I do the NutriVal because you think, yeah, I'm doing okay. But there's some areas where, I could optimize or, that needed looking at. So thank you for that. That was very, very, very helpful.
You're welcome. And I'll just add, I suppose the fourth method is actually measuring the level of the actual nutrient in the excretion, in the urine, usually. And so that's often used for amino acids. You can also test the amino acids in the blood. But what I've found is that, again, your body keeps those in quite a narrow range in the vast majority of situations. But I've done it before where I've done them both at the same time and then looked. And then the blood, all the amino acids are in a very narrow range. But when you look at the urine, there's like a few amino acids that your body is excreting zero. And it's like, well, why is it excreting none? Of course, it's doing that because it is holding on to it because it doesn't have a lot. So it's not letting any go away. And so from my mind, that's why the urinary amino acids are probably more accurate and helpful than the blood amino acids, because they're more sensitive to, let's say, minor levels of being suboptimal. And from what I've seen with looking at other people's blood aminos and all the rest of it, like they're pretty much always within range. It's very rare for them not to be. It seems to be a little bit like electrolytes. Your body keeps them in a certain range for various purposes, which, to be honest, I don't fully understand. I don't know if anyone fully understands for all of them why it keeps it in those narrow ranges. So you can tell more in that case by whether your body feels like there's enough to spare that it's excreting any.
Right. Okay. And then I was going to ask, within the building blocks, what does determine whether we don't have enough, et cetera, in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so let's go through down the chain because there's a few things. Number one is we are not taking enough in, right? Number two is that we are taking it in, as in we're eating it or swallowing it, but it is not being digested. So it's basically just going straight through us and we're pooping it out again. I want to make a distinction there between pooping it out and peeing it out. Some people say, oh, there's no point taking supplements, you just pee them straight out. Well, let me explain. If you're peeing out a supplement, so famously with B2, riboflavin, it makes your pee go bright yellow. If you're peeing it out, that means it's gone from your digestive tract, it's been absorbed through your small intestine, it's been delivered to your liver, which has then decided to put it into your blood. And then from your blood, it's been filtered by your kidneys, then taken through your urine, and then transported out. So your body has assimilated it.
Right, it's gone through the process. Okay.
Yeah, if it ends up in your urine, it has assimilated it. But you could just poop it out, and then your body hasn't assimilated it. It just hasn't absorbed it for various reasons, right? Maybe you don't have enough of the digestive juices to help to break it down and make it assimilable, specifically stomach acid, bile, and or the various pancreatic juices, pancreatic enzymes, and the baking soda as well that your body creates, sodium bicarbonate. So maybe your body, so just to review again, maybe you're not taking enough in, maybe you're not digesting enough. Third option, maybe you're excreting too much. So there are various reasons why that may happen. So one example of this we can look at is the adrenal activity. So for instance, if your adrenal glands are overactive, and you would tell that by your blood cortisol levels being high, then your body will tend to hold on to sodium and excrete too much potassium. So this is often where a person ends up with, raised blood pressure, and other potential indications. General chronic tension in the muscles and stuff like that can be one of the signs of it as well. And, twitching and kind of other spasms and stuff like that. If a person's the opposite, if their adrenal activity is actually lower than average, and that shows in low blood cortisol, they can have the opposite situation where their body is holding on to a lot of potassium and excreting a lot of sodium, which can cause its own problems, usually, low blood pressure. It's kind of the opposite of everything I just said. So that's an example where a kind of hormonal shift will cause, more or less excretion. Another example I'll give is vitamin D3. One of the main things vitamin D3 does is control how much calcium you're absorbing from the food that you eat. So, when they give recommended daily amounts of stuff, whether it's zinc, calcium, magnesium, selenium, all the rest of it, just because it says to take in X amount, 10 milligrams of zinc or 200 milligrams of magnesium or whatever they say, doesn't mean that they're expecting your body to actually absorb all of that. So in the case of calcium, your body might only absorb 10 to 20% of the 1,000 milligrams that they recommend. But it's actually a really wide margin. If you start taking, a stupid amount of vitamin D3 every day, like 50,000 IUs or something like that, like I've done before, your body's going to absorb quite a large percentage of the calcium you're taking every day. And in fact, some of the people who recommend those high doses of D3 will tell you to eat a low calcium diet to make sure that your body isn't suddenly absorbing too much calcium. Conversely, if you have vitamin D3 deficiency, which is more common and more what people are focusing on, your body will do the opposite. It will absorb a lot less calcium. And so that will be a situation if you're on a low calcium diet and you're suboptimal or even deficient in vitamin D3, then your body may well end up with a lack of calcium, which can cause all kinds of issues, certainly with bones and teeth over time. But calcium is required for every cell of the body. So this could actually create a problem with every cell of the body, potentially in one way or another. So those are kind of a couple of examples of how hormones can affect the level that we're actually excreting of different things. So that could be a factor. And then the fourth is how much of the nutrient is making its way where it actually needs to go, which is generally in the cell. And so there's various factors that can cause a problem with that, which can stop it actually entering the cell. One of them that's kind of more obvious and mechanical, I would say, is a restriction of blood flow and a restriction of lymph flow, which we've talked about in a recent episode we recorded, where we talked about how the fascia can become tight and restrict the blood flow to various areas of the body. So you could have a lack of nutrients going to the cells, into certain cells in general, because of a constriction and a lack of blood flow bringing the nutrients to the cells. That's another option. Or you can have a situation where there's not a lack of general nutrients going to cells, but specific nutrients are not getting into cells for various complicated reasons. Maybe because there's toxin there that shouldn't be there in its place. Maybe because some other cofactor that's required for the nutrient to get into cell is not there or is not working correctly. There's all kinds of things. So I know it all sounds a bit complicated. To kind of sum it up, you're not taking enough in, you're not absorbing enough, you're excreting too much, or not enough is getting into the cell. Those are like the four fundamental issues, all of which can lead to suboptimal amounts. And that's why when people say things which I consider quite foolish, like, as long as you eat a healthy diet, everything's fine, you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to have supplements. If a person's like really healthy, metabolically healthy, hormonally healthy, they have a healthy lifestyle, they move a lot, they have low stress, they're in contact with nature, they breathe fresh air, they get sunlight, they ground, all of that kind of stuff, that attitude is fairly justifiable, like don't worry about it, just live healthy and eat well. But if you're not living that kind of optimal life, or even if you are, but you're just getting older, because the reality is we just stop working as well over time. Eventually, sooner or later, no matter how healthy our lifestyle and habits and diet are, then all of these problems can still come up, and they do. And so it's worth focusing on and finding out about it and addressing before it becomes a major issue, from my perspective.
Oh, and that's great. Thank you for these, because it also helps give a greater understanding. Are there any others that come to mind for you?
So the only other factor is not so much about all of what I just talked about, but it's how much you need in the first place. And so there are two factors that will influence that, at least. Number one is your genetics, as I talked about, and I gave an example for me. And I've very rarely seen anyone, no, not very rarely, I've never seen anyone who I look through their nutrient reports and there's not at least one nutrient that they need more of than average. Like there's always at least one. Some people only have 2 or 3. Some people have dozens. Like it does vary a lot as to how many people have issue with. And some people have only 2 or 3 and they're very minor nutrients and they're not that important. So some people basically are fine, but most people have this issue. So that's one factor. And then the other factor of how much you need is down to lifestyle again, So, and lifestyle will include the diet you eat. So, for instance, if you're drinking a lot of alcohol and eating a lot of carbohydrates and going through a lot of stress and have a lot of toxicity, you need so much more vitamin B1 than someone who doesn't have any of those things going on. And that's just one example. There are many more.
And we talked about that because those things use up that building block of that B1, correct? So there is more of a demand or a need for that because of those instances, right?
Yeah. And even someone's size, to the idea of daily values for adults, I think, should be taken as a starting point. But a lot of people act like that's it, So if it says that I need this much of this, that's it. But how could it be that 100-pound person needs the same level of nutrient as a 300-pound person? Even let's assume they're both healthy.
Very good point. Yeah.
And they do this with drugs as well. The same amount of Tylenol or whatever they don't take weight into account at all. It's crazy to me. And you may say weight, well, extra fat doesn't necessarily mean that someone needs extra nutrient, but I'm talking about stature, right? A person could be taller, they could be wider, they could be deeper.
Somebody that's 4'5" versus a nearly 7-foot individual. There's going to be some disparity there.
They have a much bigger skeletal system. They have bigger heart, bigger lungs, bigger liver, bigger everything. So they need more nutrition, and vice versa. Someone who's a lot smaller. There is actually a massive variation in size of organs, way more than you may think among different human beings, especially, as you say, among the extremes. So we need to take that into account as well. So it's kind of separate from what I was talking about how we take it in and stuff. But yeah, the amount we need is a significant factor as well. And it does vary a lot. The most famous example that I know of a massive discrepancy was discovered by Linus Pauling decades ago. And he found that people who are schizophrenic literally felt a lot better if they had 100 times the level of vitamin B3 or niacin as the average person needed. So I think the average person needs 20, 30 milligrams, something like that. I think that's generally the daily value suggested. The average schizophrenic, he found, does better with thousands of milligrams a day. That's what they actually need just to feel okay. And so most nutrients are not as extreme as that. And there are a lot of nutrients that I would say it's very dangerous to take 100 times as much as average as the daily value. Like I wouldn't ever take 100 times as much iron, copper, zinc, D3, definitely A, the list goes on. There's quite a few nutrients where it's not that extreme. But still, the fact that it could ever be that extreme is just illustrative of how the idea of one size fits all is just crazy.
That is such a valid point. Such a valid point. You did say that there were 2 aspects. So this number 1 was how much you need in the first place. Was the disparity in between the 2 the second?
So the genetics need is the first one, which is innate, and then the situational need is the other. So as I said, if you have a stressful life, you need more various nutrients. If your metabolism's fast, you need more various nutrients. If you're bigger, you need more of various nutrients. But these are all kind of, things that can vary throughout the life to some degree.
Okay, so number 1, the genetic need, and 2, the situational need, right? That makes absolute sense. So going back to earlier with those 4 bits of why potentially these nutrients aren't getting to where they need to get, let's say somebody realizes that they have a suboptimal level. Is just taking more of that going to fix the issue if there is potentially any one of those 4 bits that you mentioned earlier, or is there something else they should be doing?
Well, yeah, it depends on the definition of taking, right? So it depends where the bottleneck is. So if the bottleneck is just that you're not taking enough, as in eating or drinking enough, then yeah, that's all you need to do, right? If the bottleneck is in digestion, then you have 2 options. You can either resolve your digestive issues, which are not always easy, but very important to do, or you can bypass the digestive process. And that's also become quite popular. So couple of ways you can bypass the digestive process. First of all, sublingual. So that's when you put it in your mouth, but you're not aiming to get the nutrients by swallowing them. You just put them in your mouth and they go through the tissue of your mouth straight into the bloodstream. And so often liposomal supplements are sold that help that process. And those do work well, I would say. They're often more expensive and not every nutrient can be absorbed that way, but that's probably the easiest, cheap, in many cases cheapest of the options. Another option is transdermally, so that's on the skin. That does not work with every nutrient, but it does work with some. It will not work with calcium, for instance, but it will work with magnesium. So that's a kind of like case by case thing. Then another way is actually injecting, right? So that will definitely get it into the bloodstream at least. So that will definitely bypass the digestive process. That's, I would say, the most reliable, but often, expensive and unpleasant and not necessarily necessary. So I'd have that as kind of the last resort. I'd try the sublingual first, wherever possible.
Okay, and then so that's about the digestion. And if somebody is potentially excreting too much, should there be a fix for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that really depends on why they're excreting too much, and that definitely should be looked at. So first of all, I try, if possible, and it often is possible, to measure if they are excreting too much, So, with many of the things that we talked about, it is actually possible to test the urine to see if that's what's going on. It's not always for the urine. I mean, famously, women during, fertile age are excreting, various nutrients, specifically iron, once a month, right? So that's another example of where there's excretion going on. I think those are the two main ways. And then, so yeah, find out why it's being excreted. I think that is the main thing. I gave a couple of examples, but, generally though, if I were to sum it up, it is usually around stress and toxicity. Those are the two main factors. So look for markers of stress, look to resolve stress, look for markers of toxicity, look to resolve the toxicity. Those factors are usually the causative factors for excessive excretion of nutrients above what they should be in most cases, except for more unusual medical cases.
Okay, that's a really great point. And then if like you said on that fourth point, the restriction of the blood flow or the lymph, what would somebody be doing to fix those areas so that that restriction is released?
Before I answer that, actually, I just thought of there is one more reason for excretion, and that is not technically, it's kind of toxicity, but it's not technically, you might be having too much of another good thing. So we talked about this before. So if you have too much zinc, for instance, you will excrete more copper. If you have too much copper, you'll excrete more zinc. So there's things like that. If you have too much magnesium, then you can excrete too much potassium. So there's various things like that. So the other thing you want to look at is am I having really high levels of something else that might be causing that excessive excretion? That is the other thing. The general circulation, I would really refer to people to the episode that we just recorded on that. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it's kind of dealing with that tendency to have chronic tension in the body. We did already address that in the episode that's out about chronic pain. We addressed that topic in quite a lot of detail there. Because chronic pain is often a consequence of having that chronic tension. When there's a lack of blood flow going in and a lack of lymph flow bringing waste products out, you often have a buildup of lactate, which creates pain. So that's the connection there. So the kind of recommendations in that chronic pain episode would probably be a good starting place if you feel like that is what's going on. If you also have chronic pain, then that would be a connection. In terms of the other example where it's not that your tissues are generally not getting enough nutrients because of lack of blood flow, but where the cells are specifically not taking in a certain nutrient. Unfortunately, I can't give general advice on that. That's really a case-by-case basis, and that often needs to be looked at with, a professional who really understands it, a nutritionist, some kind of naturopathic doctor, functional medicine doctor, whatever it may be, someone who really specializes in that. That is, I would say, not uncommon, but less common than the other options. So most people, once they get it into the blood, they'll feel okay. The other thing is there is the brute force strategy, which I already kind of indicated with B12, if that's safe, like it is in the case of B12. So let's say, your body is quite poor at getting enough B12 into the cell from your bloodstream. You can just take a lot of B12, one way or another, sublingually, or, people will take shots of them quite often or whatever. And that will get enough into your cells, even if your body's not very good at getting into the cells. If you really saturate your body with enough of it, if it's safe to do so, then that can be another strategy. But obviously, you should definitely only do that with things which are safe to do that with. And that's something, again, case-by-case basis.
Yeah, well, no matter what, any of and all of the things that for me, as I take it, what you just described, like if there's problems with your digestion, fix it. If you are having, too much stress or too much toxicity in your life, remove it. And then just keeping and making sure that your body is flowing smoothly with being able to release tension from those areas where, we have that pain or the buildup or the fascia's tight or the knots up. So to me, it sounds like all of us should be doing those things anyway. So really great points.
Yes, but there is the catch-22, which is why they give the alternatives. So for instance, it's very hard to have an optimal digestive system if you're deficient in certain nutrients, or even just have suboptimal levels of those nutrients. And it's very hard to have optimal levels of those nutrients when you have a digestive problem. So that's the catch-22. So that's where we want to, consider the other options, like the sublingual, or the just having a very high amount of the thing, if that's safe, or the injection, or the transdermal, or whatever. Because if we're trying to fix our digestion while we have a slow metabolism, for instance, that's very difficult to do. In fact, impossible in most cases. And yet we can't speed up our metabolism until we get enough of the nutrients which help to speed up our metabolism. So, yeah, that's one example. So that's why I do give the cheats, right? Yes, you want to fix the underlying reason, but you not only are they cheats, but they're actually often necessary to fix the problem in the first place. That's the catch-22 that really so many people I see are in. They're really in that catch-22 position where they are trying to resolve something, but in order to resolve it, they need something that they're not able to get. The hormones are another example of that. To feel better, you need enough thyroxine, but in order to have enough thyroxine, you need a healthy thyroid. But in order to have a healthy thyroid, you need a healthy body in general. In order to have a healthy body in general, you need a healthy thyroid. And that's where adding in some thyroid, or adding in some progesterone, or adding in some testosterone, or adding in whatever. It's not giving up on the body making its own. It's just, let's give it some to help kickstart it. And then when everything is working again and doing better, then you can slowly wean those things off so that your body can make its own in the case of hormones. And ditto with the, whether it's injecting nutrients or using sublinguals or whatever, it's not necessarily we have to be dependent on that for the rest of our life, but it's something that we do temporarily to kickstart the body working better so that then it can absorb whatever it needs just from food.
Very good point, Owen. Yes, absolutely. And also too, for anyone that may be in that position, it's also not to get down about it, because there is a way out. It may just take some time.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of them do take a long time to replenish. I would say I absolutely agree. I would not be, blasé about it though. There are some nutrients, and I don't say this to scare, but just to inform, that once they get really low, kind of that's it. You are really screwed. And one of them is B12. And that's, I think, why it's one of the only ones that medical doctors will check. Maybe not routinely, but fairly commonly, because it is one of those things that once you're really deficient in it, which does take many years, but your body can get to a place where it can't ever replenish its stores of it. So
you need to watch out for that one. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not true for most nutrients, but I would not. If you get a test result and it indicates that you are low in something and you also have the symptoms of it, I would not put it off for a few years. I would say, like, the sooner you address it, the easier it is, and the longer you leave it, the harder it is. It's not the way you think. I guess it's a little bit like with a plant pot, like once it gets really, really dry and the plant is wilting away and all the rest of it, if you just put water in, it just goes straight through. The plant doesn't actually absorb it. So that's why you've got to sit it in the water and like force it to absorb it. A lot of us are like those wilted plants, at least with one nutrient or with a few nutrients, and so we do not want to leave it any longer. We kind of want to saturate ourselves with that nutrient as soon as possible before we or way too much and it's too late.
I was going to ask, are there any instances where too much of a building block is detrimental?
Definitely. And the more I research, Chrissy, the more I find that this may be the case with a lot of nutrients and building blocks that actually most people don't suspect. So we can go through a few of those if you like.
Yes, please.
Okay, so some of the ones that I guess are fairly well known are like zinc and copper. So there is actually a disease, a medically recognized disease of copper excess. It's called Wilson's disease. It's pretty rare, but it's pretty bad. It's the craziest disease in the world in a way. I remember there was an episode of the TV show House about it. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I used to watch
Doctor.
watch House, but I can't specifically recall the Wilson's disease episode. But yeah, no, I did like that show.
Someone said I look like that guy on YouTube. I took it as a compliment. I think he's probably a lot better looking than me. But anyway, so yeah, I would say that's an example where a very high level something, it can, oh yeah, what's crazy about it? It's crazy that it actually can turn you into a psychopath. It can make you into a remorseless, guiltless person who likes to hurt others with no conscience. Too much copper. Just too much of one of these essential building blocks can turn you into a psychopath. It's crazy, but it seems to be true. Certainly, it is true in the case of extreme levels with Wilson's. Whether there's a spectrum of that, and the more copper you have, the more you're on the spectrum towards psychopathy, I don't know. That's not ever been studied, I don't think. But it's interesting to consider. Some of the groups that I'm involved in have this belief that actually a lot of people have excess copper. In fact, some of them even believe that copper is not an essential nutrient because of how much they see excess copper being an issue in all kinds of ways. I'm not convinced about that, but maybe I will be at some point. I'd like to actually have one of them on to make the case for that so we can all hear it and consider it. But yeah, so let's go through them one at a time. All right, so let's do vitamins first. We've done a whole episode about vitamin A. It is absolutely bad for you in excess. There is more studies on excess vitamin A than any other nutrient, and possibly even every other nutrient put together in terms of excess. Like, there's a lot that says too much really is bad. You do not want too much vitamin A. I won't go into more detail than that because we've talked about it already, but it's extremely toxic having too much of it. And I am fairly convinced that it is not actually an essential nutrient at all. In the B vitamins, they're generally well tolerated, even if you have a lot, even with most of them, even if you have 100 times the RDA, it's generally okay with B1, B2, B5, B7, and B12. Pick those very specifically. With B3, niacin, if you have 100 times the RDA, you will just have a flushing effect. It gives you like an allergic type response. Your skin goes all red and all the rest of it. There's theories as to why that is. Some people say it's not actually histamine. It's a toxic processing reaction. Vitamin B3 is actually used as a detoxification strategy by some people. And I think it certainly is a detoxifier in high levels. Whether there's actually anything wrong with having such a high dose is questionable. It's disputed. But the bottom line is it doesn't feel very good when you've done it.
Having the flush, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've had, yeah. But also we're going back to B3, as you mentioned earlier, for those that are schizophrenics, they have a higher need for it. So they are in those higher quantities or spaces of situational need.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be something that is beneficial at high levels, but still something you want to be careful of. It does tax the liver as well. It acidifies the blood. If you have a large amount of it, which your body can deal with, but it's just another stress on the body. So it's not something I would have very large amounts of unless it was very intentional. B6, if you have very excessive amounts of that, can cause neuropathy. So I would be careful with B6. B9, folate. I have not seen studies of it being terrible, but I would still watch it with folate because of complicated things that it does with methylation. If you have too much, it will definitely throw certain systems of your body out of balance. So I would not go very far above the RDA. And I think, that's it for the B vitamins. Vitamin C, you definitely can have a lot of that. And a lot of people do. It was a famous thing for a long time that people would have, the recommended amount is usually 30, 50, 60 milligrams, something like that. People would routinely have 3,000 milligrams, 5,000 milligrams, 10,000 milligrams when they were ill. The justification of that is that we're one of the only mammals that doesn't do that naturally. Most mammals, when they are under stress, and illness is a type of stress, they will naturally create more vitamin C, a lot more, just out of glucose. So the idea was, well, if animals are doing that, we've lost the ability to do that for ourselves. We should have a lot more. Can you feel a lot better when you're under stress and when you're ill, when you take high vitamin C? In my experience, yes, you absolutely can. But is it a good idea to take high vitamin C all the time? Not necessarily. First of all, if it is excessive amount, it's just another thing for your body to deal with and try and process. Your body can turn it into oxalate, which is this crystal thing, which is kind of a stress for your whole body and can form kidney stones, gallstones, things that you don't want. So I'm not a huge fan of large vitamin C unless it's temporary for a very specific purpose. And it could, some people also say it can imbalance the adrenal glands having too much vitamin C, although I haven't looked into that in too much detail. But I would not go for too much vitamin C. Vitamin D3 can kill you if you have too much, just like vitamin A can. It is potentially very dangerous. And I'm talking about supplemental vitamin D3 here. Vitamin D3 pulls calcium into the blood. It also uses up more magnesium and it causes your body to excrete more potassium. Some people are really against vitamin D3 supplementation. I'm still on the fence about that and learning about it. But vitamin D3, like high dose, is actually sold as a rat poison. Like it will kill rats. And the way that it works is it just simply pulls so much calcium into the tissues that it turns you into like a living statue. It calcifies you. So in an era where we are wanting to avoid calcification of our arteries and our, because we don't want cardiovascular disease and we're trying to avoid calcification of our brain because we don't want Alzheimer's, having very high doses of something that increases that calcium is dubious. Now, I say dubious because some people heal themselves by doing it. I'm not saying it's always a bad idea, but I am saying I would not do it without strict supervision. I would not do it without regular testing. I would not do it without also testing not just D3, but the parathyroid hormone. I would check calcium. I would check magnesium. I would check potassium. I would also do a coronary artery score, CAC score. I would be aware of the potential downside of D3 before having large doses of it. Everything I just said is true for supplemental D3. It's even true for the D3 which naturally exists in food, but it's not true for the sun. So none of what I just said happens with D3 that just comes from the sun. Vitamin E, large amounts have been shown to be not great. People like in the mainstream are trying to discredit supplements in general and vitamins and antioxidants specifically, love citing studies showing that vitamin E can create problems when it's in high doses, and they're correct. It is not great to have large amounts of vitamin E for various reasons. So I also would not do mega doses of that for very long, again, unless you are testing and checking and making sure that's definitely a good idea. For the minerals, I'll go through them quickly. Magnesium, you can have too much in terms of it will cause diarrhea. If you have too much, and it's a strain in your kidneys. If you have kidney disease and stuff like that, you want to be careful of not having too much. Potassium will kill you if you have too much, literally. That's why potassium supplements are often sold, like they'll only sell you 99 milligrams at a time, because literally something like 30 grams of potassium, you can drop dead. It'll make your heart stop. Potassium is actually one of the things they use for a lethal injection. The amount of potassium that is optimal versus the amount that will kill you is not actually such a huge margin. Now, if you're only eating food, I don't think anyone has ever died from, or even come close to dying from having too much potassium from high potassium foods, although they could imbalance their electrolytes temporarily if they had huge amounts of coconut water or fruits or something without any sodium to balance it out. But it's supplemental potassium is definitely something that you want to be careful with overdoing. Even though some people need it, and it really helps them, you still don't want to have too much.
Right. Is that why the body has these checks and balances with certain vitamins or minerals or nutrients in that way? Because as you said, if you have too much potassium, it's going to push something else out, or these sort of things. Do you think that might be why?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So calcium can calcify you, as we just talked about. Now, eating more is not as much of a risk factor as the vitamin D3, as I explained earlier, because the vitamin D3 makes you absorb so much more of it, but it's still a factor. We talked about too much copper. Too much zinc will make you nauseous, but it is also dangerous over time. One of the ways it's dangerous, it will deplete the minerals it competes with. So you won't have enough copper, you won't have enough molybdenum, you won't have enough iron. Too much iron is a big thing that I'm seeing in the alternative health community these days. There's a lot of talk about iron being bad. There's at least a couple of mechanisms that I'm aware of, which are, very validated. One of them is that iron is food for pathogenic organisms. So the more iron that you have, the more you're potentially feeding them. But the more established one is that iron above a certain level acts like a free radical. So it kind of rusts your blood, it rusts your system, it damages everything that it touches. There are some people who believe that unbound iron is like one of the most dangerous things for your health and for the body. Morley Adams, I believe, is an author who very much focuses on that as like the cause of all disease. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but not much. I think his book is called like The Cure of All Disease or something like that. Ray Peat as well, who we've talked about before, had a fairly similar view of iron, that it's not good. And he liked products, supplements and foods which stop your body absorbing iron. He was a big fan of not having too much iron. Too much iron will definitely kill you. Again, there are warnings, for instance, like on iron supplements, that if a child accidentally swallows a whole bottle or something like that, they could die. So this is serious again. You do not want to overdo your iron. And then in terms of minerals, so molybdenum, I looked into that. People taking very high doses of that cause serious problems sometimes, but that's certainly harder to do with molybdenum than pretty much all the other minerals I've mentioned so far. Selenium, if it's too high, can cause problems. I'm trying to think. There's actually very few minerals that if you went really high dose on them, that they're not going to cause problems. So, yeah. But generally, with most of them, that won't happen with food. Although that is a generalization, not necessarily true, overall. You absolutely can get hemochromatosis, like this iron toxicity, if you have a specific genetic variant and you eat a lot of meat, especially if you're a man. So that absolutely does happen. Some people say that, a high plant food diet, especially eating a lot of liver and stuff as well, if you had a lot of plant and liver, then that would create copper toxicity. Having a lot of dairy along with D3 supplementation, but I guess it's a supplement again, would definitely potentially cause hypercalcemia. So it's not only from supplementation. You can actually be excessive from food for various different things. Definitely can happen and does happen, although certainly being excessive is more common from supplements because it's easier to do. The other category I just want to focus on is the fats and the amino acids a little bit, if you're okay. If
Yeah,
I'll carry
please,
on.
do.
Okay, so too much omega-6s, specifically the kind of raw form of omega-6, linoleic acid, which is generally found in seed oils. Often, people substitute seed oils when they mean omega-6. Although technically, there's plenty of omega-6s in, some animal food like chicken and pork, and there's no omega-6 pretty much in macadamia nuts, which are a seed. So it's not quite as simple as that. But anyway, too much seed oils in general, too much omega-6 containing foods absolutely is really bad for you. It will not kill you in the way that too much potassium or vitamin A or vitamin D3 will short term, but it will massively undermine your health, and it will kill you over time. But it will kill you in the form of insulin resistance, and then type 2 diabetes and heart disease and all those kind of ways. It will kill you by contributing to these serious metabolic diseases, as opposed to poisoning you directly. But it's still really bad news. Saturated fat is you can definitely potentially have too much saturated fat. And I see genetics as being a big factor in that. I know some people thrive on having 50, 60, 70% of their calories coming from saturated fat. Some of the keto people, some of the carnivore people. But for some people, that's really not good. Their body doesn't handle it well, and it creates lots of problems. So that one's really variable. And then, omega-3s are a bit of a controversial one that I still haven't kind of finalized my opinion on. But it's certainly possible that too much omega-3 is not a good thing. What's generally is established is that a higher ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is good. The thing that's more questionable is it better just to have low levels of both? That's the thing that has not been quite decided, at least to me. But if you're going to eat omega-6s, which almost everyone does, if you have a normal diet to any degree, if you ever eat out, if you ever eat packaged food, if you ever eat nuts and seeds and all those things that contain it, then you may as well definitely have some omega-3s to balance it out. But the idea of the more omega-3, the better, I am suspicious of. I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. Now, the amino acids are probably the least well known. If you're quite into like health and nutrition, you probably are familiar with a lot of what I said with these excessive ones. But the amino acids are actually very interesting. So in my studies, at least, there are quite a few amino acids that if you restrict them entirely, the mouse will live like 30, 40% longer. And funnily enough, a lot of those amino acids are actually amino acids that are considered essential. They're not even in the non-essential category.
Why do you think that is?
Well, one theory I've heard about that is that a lot of the establishing what amino acids are essential comes from studying the growth of livestock, cows, sheep, stuff like that. And so what they're measuring is what's essential for the animals to grow. And so they've tried and played around, and lysine was one, for instance. Like they would feed cattle just corn, and then they'd find that they didn't grow properly and they had all these severe diseases and issues. And then when they learned how to synthesize lysine, they started adding lysine to corn, and suddenly the cattle were fine. And they're like, there you go. Lysine is an essential amino acid, And so there's a kind of similar process for a lot of the amino acids. So out of the 8 amino acids that are considered essential, so let's just go through them. There's lysine, phenylalanine, there's leucine, isoleucine, valine, methionine, histidine, and then lastly threonine, which is the one that I always forget. And then sometimes arginine, they consider that conditionally sometimes essential. And tryptophan as well. So out of those essential amino acids, a lot of them are actually suspicious for potentially reducing lifespan based on the mouse studies. So all of the branched chain amino acids, which is leucine, isoleucine, and valine, they all increase insulin release, and insulin is something which the higher it is, the more that it potentially ages us. And they also are part of the mTOR system, which is kind of like this anabolic gene. And the opposite of that is the AMPK system, which is this catabolic gene, which helps to break down cells and prevent mutations of cells and stuff like that. So a lot of people into longevity are trying to promote AMPK and trying to reduce mTOR because they want to live longer and they want to encourage autophagy, which is the breakdown of old cells to make sure that there aren't cells hanging around which are not working properly, which can create all kinds of health issues. And so they're often minimizing or sometimes even avoiding those branched chain amino acids because they are directly opposite of what they're trying to achieve. And this is another example of, are the branched chain amino acids essential for growth? Absolutely. Of course, mTOR is anabolic. It's growth, like literally. But once you're an adult, you're not a bodybuilder or whatever, you're not trying to grow anymore, is having high amounts of the amino acids which lead to growth necessarily a good thing? So a lot of people in the longevity community say no. And that's why they take things like metformin or berberine, which encourages AMPK, and they avoid things which stimulate mTOR, like the branched chain amino acids.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I've found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. Well, let me ask you this, because, having a certain amount of muscle mass is also, what keeps us, it's part of vitality as we age. So, I'm assuming that we would need that mTOR for building those muscles and keeping those muscles vital and working well and keeping us strong.
I would say avoiding them is a very bad idea, but reducing them may have some validity from this perspective. So it's not to like have none, but it's so let me just actually zoom out a second and explain this a little bit. So not all proteins are equal, whether you're getting your protein from eggs or dairy, or different types of dairy, even are different. Sheep dairy is one, cow dairy is another. Whether you're getting it from different animals, your beef, your pork, whatever, whether you get it from nuts, whether you get it from seeds, from lentils, from beans, this and that. All of these different proteins have different amino acid profiles, right? And so what it is not that you're ever going to not have any of these, because you're not going to go on a no protein diet. It's extremely difficult to do and not desirable. But it's more that you're going to prefer proteins that don't have high levels of these amino acids that you might be trying to reduce or minimize. Does that make sense? So you're always going to have some. So histidine is the building block for histamine, funnily enough. They don't sound so similar just by coincidence. And so some people like to reduce histidine because they have a problem breaking down histamine. There's an enzyme called DAO that some people do not make very much of. That's a genetic factor again. And then, reducing histidine in their diet is often desirable for that reason. Again, not avoiding, but you wouldn't want to go for the foods high in histidine. You also wouldn't want to have, especially protein, which has been aged or fermented. So you wouldn't want to have cheese, especially aged cheese. You wouldn't want to have, say, beef that's been hung for, a month or whatever, because then that histidine in that protein is more likely to have converted into histamine through the fermentation process. So that's why you might want to avoid histidine. I've never seen anything about avoiding lysine or phenylalanine, except for very rare genetic mutations. In the case of phenylalanine, there are some people who can't break it down, but you'd know about it if you had that issue. Threonine, I've not seen anything about that either. But the other two on my list here, tryptophan and methionine, are definitely suspect. The mouse studies I talked about earlier, when they gave mice a diet identical to the control, but with no methionine, they live 30% longer. When they did something similar with tryptophan, again, they lived 30% longer. So tryptophan is a building block of a few different things, but one of them primarily is serotonin. And so we talked about this in an episode before, so I won't go into it here, but there is significant evidence that serotonin may not be that great, again, especially excessive levels. And so reducing, maybe not removing, but reducing the amount of tryptophan and thereby reducing the amount of serotonin may be a very good thing. Methionine is the only sulfurous, what's considered essential amino acid. And sulfur is a bit of a controversial one, again, whether it's beneficial or not. But have you heard of homocysteine, Chrissy? It's in your Nutrival report.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds familiar, but I don't know why.
So homocysteine is actually a great predictor of mortality. So it's a little bit out of favor these days, but it still definitely deserves testing. I'm glad that the test that we do regularly incorporates it. And so if your homocysteine is at the high end of the reference range, and especially above the high range, that massively increases your chance of having a heart attack, of having a stroke, I can't remember the full list, but all kinds of very severe health issues. So homocysteine is a big predictor. So the theory that I understand is that high levels of methionine will contribute to that buildup of homocysteine. And so that could potentially be a reason why it's a problem. So cysteine is one of the other sulfurous amino acids, and your body can turn methionine into cysteine. And so the whole MTHFR and the methylation cycle, it's all probably too complicated to talk about right here and right now. But the bottom line is excess methionine can create problems. And so that is the theory as to why when mice are given no methionine, again, once they're an adult, no one's saying you don't need it in order to get to adulthood, but once you're an adult, to significantly reduce the methionine may actually be highly beneficial. And then, it gets more complicated. There's also ratios. So glycine is another amino acid, which is really great. So I won't talk about it too much here because we're talking about excess things. But if you have low glycine, then it's worse to have high methionine. If you have a good ratio of glycine, so if you have the same amount of methionine, but then you have low glycine, that's much worse than having the same amount and high glycine, right? The glycine helps to mitigate the problems from having it too high. So it's not necessarily as simple as just removing it. But yeah, so this is why, for instance, one of the reasons why people say like a very high muscle meat source of protein only is not great, because muscle meat has high methionine. Some of it, especially if it's like chicken, has high levels of tryptophan, chicken and turkey, stuff like that. And maybe it's not a great idea to get most of your or all your protein from dairy, because that will be very high in the branched chain amino acids like leucine specifically, and also quite high in tryptophan. And that's why, if you're a kind of carnivore type person, you might want to get more from collagen, so bone broth, connective tissue, stuff like that, because that has high levels of other amino acids like glycine, proline, hydroxyproline. It doesn't have any of these bad guys or potential bad guys in there, for instance, right? And then also, plant-based proteins also tend to be lower, not always, but tend to be lower in methionine specifically, and often tryptophan as well. So yeah, it's complicated, but it could well be that excess levels of some of these amino acids are very detrimental, and we have no idea. Maybe we think we're eating this super healthy diet and we're getting plenty of protein and all the rest of it, and we're maybe potentially causing problems. Now, all of this is probably not too bad if we're only eating food again, but especially if we start playing around with supplements, like if you start taking large amounts of tryptophan because you hear it's good for serotonin, that will help you, be less stressed or something like that. Or some people take methionine because they hear it's good or cysteine because they hear it's good for detoxification. Some people take like the branched chain amino acids because they go into the gym and they want to support their muscles. So it's good to know that there are actually potential downsides to these various things. And you'd actually be surprised if you take a lot of supplements, how many supplements have methionine in or have tryptophan in. That maybe that's not such a great thing. There's a supplement that's well known and a lot of people love it called N-acetylcysteine, because it is a building block of glutathione, but it's also cysteine, this sulfurous amino acids.
I was just going to ask, yeah.
Which when mice are given no cysteine, they live a lot longer. So it's a tricky thing, right?
That is a
It's not
tricky thing. Yeah, it's not, yeah.
it's not always that simple.
No, exactly. And so I know I'm really glad you're bringing up these points because, as we talked about in the Feel Younger Diet episode, where you think you may be eating this very, very healthy diet, but maybe some things aren't quite working for you, and you really broke it down into going into and bringing up the points to identify if what you are eating or how to figure out, the right diet that is right for you. So no, those are really great points because it does make you think about, okay, well, where am I getting the protein? Is it having the things that I'm taking in? Are they having the desired effects that I really want? So I'm glad you brought these points up.
Absolutely. And honestly, it is tricky. Like if you really want to delve into this, is methionine a good thing? Is cysteine a good thing? Then that's like a full methylation panel, they call it, from, a company like Genova or Doctor's Data or whatever. And then they'll actually tell you, you have too much of that, you should have less, you should have more glycine, you should have more B vitamins or whatever. Like if you do that especially with a practitioner, they'll actually be able to tell you once and for all, probably, if they're competent, like which of these amino acids you may or may not need more of. But I guess what I'm saying is the kind of simple answer, just the protein element of this is, or maybe no, with all of them is, okay, number one, be careful with supplementation. It may be a miracle that really helps you, but it may also make things worse. Like it's good to do it from a place of being informed, either by doing your own testing or your own research and investigation thoroughly, or by working with a practitioner who, again, has done that, their own testing and research and investigation, that they really understand this topic. If you're going to do supplementation, and even with diet, this is why when people say like a varied balanced diet, I'm not saying you should have a varied diet, because maybe for you getting all your protein from one source is appropriate, right? Every case is different. Or getting all your fat from one source is appropriate. But I'm just saying, ideally, especially if you're not feeling as good as you would like to be, or if you're aging more rapidly than you would like to, or whatever, like test, just actually find out. Genetic testing, right, to see what the tendency is. Is saturated fat good for you, or is unsaturated fat better for you? Are there specific amino acids you need more of? Are there specific acids that you need less of? Amino acids you need less of? And then also, and it is more expensive and time consuming and all the rest, but ideally, actual testing of the type we talked about, where you see what your levels are of these things. Now, even as I said, the actual testing may not be helpful in one sense, which is they are only going to tell you how you are compared to average of, say, your amino acids, or say your level of different omega fats. And maybe you don't want to be average, right? So, for instance, you may get one of the tests I recommend and it tells you need more methionine. That doesn't necessarily mean you may need more methionine for optimal health. That just means that you have less than what is average. So it gets very, very complicated, unfortunately. But I guess the simple answer would be, if you're not interested in any of that, would be a varied balanced diet, like everyone says. Okay. And be careful with supplements. Only take them if you actually need them.
Going back to, the importance of the building blocks, I'm assuming that they are all important because they are labeled building blocks, but are there some that are more important than others?
So if they're essential, they're essential, right? So we got the essential amino acids. The essential fats is a little bit more disputed, but let's assume that they are essential as well.
Can you just clarify what essential means here?
Oh, essential means you will die without it. Yeah. So that is, just die or have real severe disease. But ultimately, if it's untreated, death. So there are amino acids that are essential. They're the 8 or 9 that I just went through. Although, as I said, a couple of those I'm disputing whether they're truly essential once you're an adult. There's the essential fats. I'm kind of disputing whether all of those are definitely essential, but they're considered to be essential. It was, relatively recent research by a guy called Udo Erasmus that kind of proved that they were essential, and it's been accepted by the mainstream. But there are people having zero so-called essential fats for many, many years who were doing just fine. Just like there are people who are having zero vitamin A of any kind for several years and doing just fine. So we are questioning whether everything that's considered essential is truly essential. But anyway, there are essential vitamins. That one is also questioned, right? but it's the whole list I went through: vitamin A, the B's, C, D, E, and then K. Actually, I didn't talk about. K is the only one of the fat-soluble vitamins that there doesn't seem to be a toxic level of, and that's based on research done in Japan, where people were having, again, literally over 100 times the recommended daily amount for years on end and had no negative consequences. So K is one of the ones I feel safe about, which is probably why I forgot to add it earlier. But yeah, there are several vitamins that I would question are definitely essential, but the one that I'm pretty sure is not essential is vitamin A. But all of the vitamins are considered essential by mainstream. And then out of the minerals, that's also kind of disputed a little bit. Different authorities will consider different ones essential, but generally it's calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, manganese, selenium, zinc, copper, molybdenum is borderline, chromium is borderline, vanadium is borderline, lithium are borderline. I've probably forgotten one because, again, I'm doing all this off the top of my head. But, there are certain minerals that are considered to be essential, certain minerals that are considered to be, we don't know, but we think they probably are, and they're often included in multi-mineral formulas and all the rest of it. But that's why sometimes they're not given a recommended daily amount, because they're not actually sure if they are definitely beneficial or not. Iron, of course, we talked about earlier, but I didn't say it just now. So, yeah. So essential means that the mainstream considers if you don't have it, you will have serious disease or death. That's the definition. But as I said, there are people questioning that. There are people going years without essential fats. There are people going years without essential amino acids. There are people going years without essential vitamins and doing better than ever. So some of us are starting to question whether all these things are essential, but they're considered essential.
Okay. And then how do these building blocks relate to aging?
Yeah, great question. So, as you know, one of our missions with Rejuvenate Podcast is to combat premature aging. We're not trying to get you to live forever like some kind of vampire, but we don't want you to have the horrible experience of feeling older than you actually are. That's terrible. We want you to feel the opposite. And so the truth is, all of these nutrients, if you have a suboptimal amount or an excessive amount, will lead to premature aging. Not just can, will. Because anything that stresses the body will prematurely age you. It's really as simple as that. So having said that, I've given a few examples, like anabolic things that are more anabolic will tend to increase aging, even though they make you feel better. This is not just true for the amino acids, it's also true for hormones. Like growth hormone will tend to make you feel better, but it's also kind of implicated in premature aging to some degree. Some of the most important anti-aging nutrients, it's hard to say, but off the top of my head, I would say, lysine and tyrosine stroke phenylalanine would be probably my favorite amino acids for anti-aging. And glycine, sorry. Tyrosine for the reasons I said earlier, and phenylalanine is made out of it. Glycine, because of its importance in collagen formation specifically, so it'll just make you look younger. And a lot of people like to use glycine or collagen peptides for exactly that reason. And lysine because of its importance for supporting the immune system specifically, which helps with anti-aging. So yeah, I like those for that. With the fats, I wouldn't give any of them as a definite anti-aging because it depends on the person. But I'd say definitely aging is excessive omega-6. So I definitely reduce omega-6s to reduce premature aging. With the minerals, I would say zinc and magnesium and selenium would probably be my top anti-aging minerals, because generally people don't have optimal amounts of them, and because of their roles in kind of protecting DNA and keeping a person in a youthful state hormonally. So in those few different ways, I would strongly associate them with anti-aging. And then in terms of the vitamins, I would put most of the B vitamins as anti-aging because of their support of the nervous system and the immune system and the metabolism. all of which, when those slow down, will accelerate aging. I would say vitamin C as well, both for its stress-reducing properties and also its collagen formation properties. It will help you to look younger. Vitamin D at the right level, but I would not. Yeah, vitamin D is a tricky one. I'm going to reserve judgment on that. And E, so long as it's not excessive, I would put as anti-aging again, because again, it like helps you to look younger. So it's often applied to the skin. Vitamin K, I would definitely put as an anti-aging one. And that's been one of my most popular videos on YouTube so far, is when I called vitamin K an anti-aging nutrient. I 100% stand by that, because it has the opposite effect of what we warned about earlier with vitamin D3. It actually pulls calcium out of the tissues and puts it into the bones where you actually want it. The Japanese study I said earlier, people having massive doses of vitamin K2, that was specifically to reduce the calcification of the arteries, which of course is like the number 1 or number 2 cause of death throughout most of the world. So I see vitamin K2 as a very direct anti-aging nutrient. I don't know if I'd call it the number 1, but it's certainly up there. Those are the essential nutrients that I would consider to be the most important for anti-aging. But again, the big takeaway is having every nutrient at the optimal level is the ultimate thing for anti-aging. But those would be like my starting place if someone is, has limited resources for testing or buying nutrients or whatever it might be. Those would be the best starting places. There are other nutrients which are not essential, which are great, but we've talked about them, before in other episodes, like maybe coenzyme Q10 and PQQ and all those kind of things. But for now, let's stick to the essential ones. And yeah, because we're talking about building blocks, right? So those are the building blocks that I would really go for to support anti-aging if I couldn't test and I was just, picking something.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought this to my attention and that we're taking this out to the listeners, because, before you and I just started having the discussion and you brought to my awareness what building blocks were, I just thought, yeah, okay, my blood test is here. It says I'm doing great, blah, 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 blah. Then when you introduced me to the Nutrifil, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And so it just really opened my eyes to a lot more things. And I do believe that, a lot of people out there don't necessarily have this information or understand how important these beautiful building blocks are. So I'm really glad that you're bringing this to our attention. I know we're at the end of our episode, so I wanted to ask, are there any other final thoughts that you want to leave with our listeners and those that have joined us today?
Yeah, I really hope that you feel informed by this and that I haven't left you more confused than you were at the start. Unfortunately, people often become very popular because they sell simple answers, right? And, just take this nutrient, everything will go away. More common these days, even just don't have any of this nutrients and all your problems will go away. I wish that things were that simple. In terms of a starting place, I know I'm going to sound self-serving saying this, but it's honestly the case. An easiest place to start is with the genetics when it comes with these. Just find out if you have an innate, excessive need for a particular nutrients compared to other people. And then if it's not one that's one of the questionable ones that I mentioned earlier, then just start having a moderate amount of that nutrient and see if you feel better. That would be like the simplest starting place, I would say, that's, safe and very likely to be effective.
Beautiful, beautiful, Ellen. Well said, well said. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's our pleasure to bring you this information, and please, to help us, please like and subscribe, hit that bell icon so you don't miss an episode. Leave your comments below, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.